According to the International Property Maintenance Code, or IPMC, a dwelling unit is defined as a single unit providing complete and independent living facilities for one or more persons, and consisting of rooms and other spaces dedicated to eating, sleeping, sanitation, and cooking. The IPMC does not explicitly state that all of the requirements for a dwelling unit must be contained within the unit itself. However, it is generally accepted that a dwelling unit must have its own kitchen and bathroom facilities. This is because these facilities are essential for independent living. If a guest room's kitchen and bathroom are located in the same floor but are not necessarily a part of the guest room would not be considered a dwelling unit. This is because the guest room would not have its own complete and independent living facilities. However, if the kitchen and bathroom were shared by a group of guest rooms that were all located on the same floor, then the guest rooms could be considered dwelling units because the shared facilities would be considered to be part of each guest room. It is crucial to recognize that local building codes may differ from the IPMC. Therefore, it is always best to consult with your local building department to determine whether the guest room meets the definition of a dwelling unit in the specific jurisdiction. When evaluating whether a guest room qualifies as a dwelling unit, several factors should be considered. Firstly, the completeness of the living facilities within the guest room itself is paramount. Does the room provide all the necessary spaces and amenities for eating, sleeping, sanitation, and cooking independently? Secondly, the degree of independence afforded to the occupant is crucial. Can the occupant live entirely self-sufficiently within the guest room, or are they reliant on shared facilities or services outside of the room? Thirdly, the specific requirements of the local building codes must be taken into account, as they may impose additional or stricter criteria for defining a dwelling unit. It is also helpful to consider the intent behind the dwelling unit definition. Building codes typically aim to ensure that dwelling units provide a safe, healthy, and self-contained living environment for occupants. This includes ensuring access to essential facilities like kitchens and bathrooms without undue reliance on shared or external resources. When assessing shared facilities, it's important to examine the extent to which they are readily accessible and usable by the occupants of the guest rooms. Are the shared facilities adequately sized and maintained to accommodate the needs of all occupants? Are they located in close proximity to the guest rooms? And are they available at all times without restrictions? If the shared facilities are inadequate or inconvenient, it may further weaken the argument that the guest rooms qualify as dwelling units. Furthermore, the building department may consider the overall layout and design of the building when determining whether the guest rooms meet the dwelling unit definition. Are the guest rooms arranged in a way that promotes independent living, or are they more akin to hotel rooms or dormitory accommodations? Are there any shared common areas or services that suggest a non-dwelling unit arrangement? In some cases, the building department may require the submission of architectural plans or other documentation to demonstrate compliance with the dwelling unit requirements. This may include showing the location and size of the guest rooms, the layout of the shared facilities, and any other relevant information. It is also important to be aware of any potential zoning regulations that may affect the determination of whether a guest room qualifies as a dwelling unit. Zoning ordinances often specify the types of uses that are permitted in different areas of the city or county, and they may impose restrictions on the number of dwelling units that can be located on a particular property. If the guest rooms are located in an area where dwelling units are not permitted, or if the number of guest rooms exceeds the allowable density, then they may not be considered dwelling units, regardless of whether they meet the other criteria. In addition to the IPMC and local building codes, there may be other regulations or standards that are relevant to the definition of a dwelling unit. For example, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, sets accessibility requirements for dwelling units that are intended for use by people with disabilities. If the guest rooms are subject to the ADA, then they must comply with these requirements in order to be considered dwelling units. Similarly, there may be state or federal housing laws that define dwelling units for specific purposes, such as determining eligibility for government assistance programs. It is always advisable to consult with legal counsel or other qualified professionals to ensure compliance with all applicable laws and regulations. Ultimately, the determination of whether a guest room qualifies as a dwelling unit is a complex and fact-specific inquiry. It depends on a variety of factors, including the specific language of the applicable codes and regulations, the physical characteristics of the guest room and the shared facilities, and the overall intent and purpose of the building. By carefully considering all of these factors and consulting with the appropriate authorities, it is possible to make an informed decision about whether a guest room meets the definition of a dwelling unit. The interpretation of building codes and regulations can sometimes be subjective, and different jurisdictions may have different interpretations of the same provisions. Therefore, it is important to seek clarification from the local building department if there is any ambiguity or uncertainty. They can provide guidance on how the codes and regulations apply to the specific situation and can help to avoid potential misunderstandings or violations. It's worth noting that the definition of a dwelling unit can have significant implications for property owners and occupants. For example, dwelling units are typically subject to different property taxes and utility rates than non-dwelling units. They may also be subject to different building codes and regulations, such as those related to fire safety, plumbing, and electrical systems. Furthermore, the classification of a guest room as a dwelling unit can affect the rights and responsibilities of both the landlord and the tenant. For example, tenants in dwelling units typically have greater legal protections than those in non-dwelling units, such as the right to a lease, the right to privacy, and the right to habitable living conditions. Landlords, on the other hand, have certain obligations to maintain dwelling units in a safe and sanitary condition and to comply with all applicable laws and regulations. Therefore, it is important to carefully consider the implications of the dwelling unit definition before making any decisions about the use or occupancy of a guest room. If there is any doubt about whether a guest room qualifies as a dwelling unit, it is always best to err on the side of caution and seek professional advice. This can help to avoid potential legal or financial problems in the future. In summary, determining whether a guest room qualifies as a dwelling unit requires a careful analysis of the relevant codes and regulations, the physical characteristics of the guest room and the shared facilities, and the overall intent and purpose of the building. It is important to consult with the local building department and other qualified professionals to ensure compliance with all applicable laws and regulations.